Good afternoon, Mr. Appathurai.
Good afternoon.
First of all, let me thank you on behalf of our readers for finding time in your busy schedule to talk to us.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Apart from being a deputy assistant secretary general, you are a special representative to Central Asia and the Caucasus. Those regions are often described as strategically important regions. So how would you frame their importance?
I think they're important in different ways, but equally important. The Caucasus is NATO's neighborhood. It's home for us, or at least right next door to home. And what happens there affects us immediately and directly. This borders on our territory. But it's not just an immediate security threat from violence. It's also that this region is an important transit region for energy and for other supplies, and because we share common values. So this is very much a community, which the EU calls, I think, the Eastern Partnership. But for us, this is our next-door neighbors, and in the case of Georgia, a country that wants to move right in, and of course the NATO allies have decided that will happen. Central Asia is strategically important for different reasons, and I would say there are two in particular. One is the general strategic importance of Central Asia as an energy producer and transit region. That's clear. But secondly, because of Afghanistan, we share an interest with them in ensuring that Afghanistan is no longer a threat to the region, to itself, and to all of us. And so we want to work with them to help create constructive solutions for Afghanistan, which is in everybody's interest. So I think those are the two major reasons why NATO allies identify these regions as strategically important and appointed a special representative, which is a post I happen to hold now.
Thank you. Speaking during his most recent visit to Georgia, Secretary General has said that Georgia has come a lot closer to NATO. Very soon after that, Russian President soon-to-be ex-president Dmitry Medvedev has said, and I quote, has said that the August 2008 war with Georgia was to prevent Georgia's accession to NATO, and here is it was a lesson for NATO, to say it shortly. And here is, I quote, like, for some of our partners, including for the North Atlantic Alliance, it was a signal that before taking a decision about expansion of the alliance, one should at first think about the geopolitical stability. End of quote. Medvedev's remarks were followed by Sergei Lavrov's comment saying that Georgia's accession to NATO can lead to another war, like 2008 gamble, to put it in his words. What is your take on the comments of Russian leadership?
It's very simple from a NATO point of view. The Russian leadership can say what it wants, and it does, but the NATO allies are the ones that decide on membership. They took a decision in Bucharest that Georgia will become a NATO member if it still wants to, and when it meets the standards, of course. It still wants to, and based on the popular support in Georgia, I expect that to stay the same. Georgia is working to meet the standards. So we haven't changed our view. We continue to work towards that step when Georgia will become a NATO member, and Georgia is taking the steps as well. And in fact, as the Secretary General said, we're getting closer together. We've just agreed a package of measures to, as we call it, enhance Georgia's connectivity to NATO. Over the past few years, including since 2008, Georgia has taken steps that bring it in closer links, closer ties, closer connections to NATO. We're going to take note of that as the National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolkeria, is here when President Saakashvili comes in a few weeks to meet with the North Atlantic Council again. We'll take note of these decisions to enhance connectivity between Georgia and NATO, and we're going to do that. So step by step, this process is happening, regardless of what other parties might say.
Thank you. Before the interview, I looked through your publications, And I found an interesting one of 2002 about the future of NATO and like up to in the post-Cold War era. And I would like to quote you. For the 4 decades of the Cold War, the priorities in European security policy were pithily set out by Lord Ismay, NATO's first Secretary General. Keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and Germans down. These priorities have been met in historic fashion. Germany is a leading member of the peaceful and integrated European Union and of NATO. Russia is no longer an adversary, but is an instead increasingly trustworthy partner. So what do you think, 10 years have passed since this publication has saw the daylight. So what do you think after 10 years, like, about Russia as a partner?
Well, first, this is the first time that anyone's ever quoted me to me. So thank you for that experience. Since 2002, the level of integration, or let's say of deep cooperation between NATO and Russia, integration is probably not the right word, is far beyond what actually I think most people realize. We have a NATO-Russia Council where Russia sits as an equal with the other NATO countries, and there's a whole substructure under that of various committees that are working on various things, not with NATO on one side and Russia on the other, but as equals. The level of cooperation on Afghanistan is very profound. Russia provides transit, but also we train Central Asian and Afghan and now Pakistani counter-narcotics officials. We provide, with Russia, helicopters and parts and training for the Afghan National Army. And this is now deepening again in the last few days. So we actually do a lot, and we do a lot when it comes to counterterrorism, developing new technology. So actually there's a lot going on. Missile defense has the potential to be a sea change in that direction, if and when we come to an agreement. If we don't come to an agreement, frankly, we don't believe that this would undermine Russian security, but they do believe it. So right now, the main effort is to come to a modus vivendi and, if possible, cooperation between a Russian system and a NATO system on missile defense, which, to come back to Georgia for a moment, we believe would be very good for European security. Why? Because a better relationship between Russia and NATO, in the broadest sense, would create a better political climate, including for countries like Georgia. So we think it's in everybody's interest that we come to this deal.
Thank you. And how would you explain Russia taking as a threat the enlargement of the alliance of the democratic state? How can democratic states pose this? Why is it taken as a threat? What could be your explanation?
Well, I'm not the Russian government spokesman, and it's not a job I'm looking for. No, I don't, nor do I think they're looking for me. So I don't necessarily fully understand it. Russia experts say that Russia continues to see security in what you might call, or what we call, a zero-sum fashion. If you win, I lose. If you're stronger, I'm weaker. If you're bigger, I'm smaller. We try to see, and I think we do see, security through a different lens. In North American English, we have an expression, a high tide floats all boats. In other words, if I'm safer, you're safer. If I'm more secure, you're more secure. When we share a common geographic space. So we don't see it as a threat to Russia. We don't even think of Russia as a threat to us, which is why we don't see this as a threat to Russia. It's also the case that there's a principle involved. And the principle is that a democracy that meets NATO standards has a right, and by the way, we have an obligation to consider them for membership. But they have to meet the standards. So that's the way we look at it, and we hope that Russia recognizes that when Poland joined, relations got better between Poland and Russia. When the Baltic states joined, relations got better between the Baltic states and Russia. On both sides. So actually, history has demonstrated that not only this is no threat to Russia, but it's a benefit to Russia in a political sense.
Maybe because they feel safer and they can better communicate with Russia after they feel safer under the umbrella of NATO. That explains the relations getting better.
There are many people who say that, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's self-confidence, and they can relax. and speak to Russia in a more calm way. But certainly, history has demonstrated an improvement in relations and not a diminishment.
Well, if Lord Ismay's words, as you have quoted, are sort of met already, and like they're no longer relevant. But how would you define the raison d'être of the alliance today? What is the priority of the European security now?
Well, I can tell you the Secretary General, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, has pushed all of us to come up with another new little expression like that that could summarize it all. And nobody has managed to do it, including me, I must say, because unfortunately it's a little bit more complicated. But in essence, in terms of its structure and the way we look at things, NATO has gone basically from being a sumo wrestler, kind of big and heavy, maybe not that attractive, to being a fencer. Slim, fast, able to move in various directions. I'm not sure that's a great analogy, but certainly the way we're adapting is going in that direction. The basic point of NATO remains collective defense. It is still to defend our members, but we do it in a different way because we don't face an existential military threat. What we need to do now is retain political solidarity. This is a political club, not a military club, but with a military vocation. And do three things: defend ourselves, do crisis management, Libya, Afghanistan, where Georgia is such an important contributor, and third, to build collective security, prevent crises, promote partnership, promote dialogue. NATO's reaching out now to the Arab League, for example, or the Gulf Cooperation Council, organizations with which we would have never had contact in the past. But because we had done this when Libya happened, we knew who to call, they knew us, they trusted us, we trusted them, and we put together a political coalition that worked. So those are, in essence, the three core tasks of NATO: collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security.
Thank you. Just to exhaust the missile defense issue, about a year ago in your interview you said that it's at the very beginning stage. You haven't yet determined the scope, the aim, the technical parameters. So what's the progress on that?
Well, as we discussed, on the NATO-Russia track, the progress is limited. Within NATO, progress is quite substantial. And what you'll see at the Chicago summit at the end of May is NATO turn the key on missile defense and start it up. We will have an initial operating capability by the end of May. What does that mean? It means that the facilities are starting to be put in place, principally American, but also with some European assets, Spanish ships, Turkish radar that's already active, and some Dutch and other assets. And what NATO will be able to do as of the end of May is plug it all together and have a concept of operations for how to use it. There's still many phases to go. That's phase one. We'll have it complete by about 2020. But we've turned the key to start the process in a couple of months.
15 Georgian soldiers died in Afghanistan since the deployment of Georgian troops there. My compatriots have started to ask why. Why is it happening? And Saakashvili is coming under attack already, like from the opposition. One of the representatives of the major opposition force even called Afghanistan mission as an ambiguous aventure that Saakashvili engaging country in. With the parliamentary and presidential elections coming, I'm sure that the pressure will be increasing. So what is the mission of the NATO forces and the allies like ISAF in Afghanistan, and how it's going to affect Georgia?
This is a discussion that's happening in almost every country. But I think the Georgian people should be reassured, and we can push back on the aventure idea, because there are 50 countries whose parliaments have approved this mission. That's no coincidence. There are strong and clear UN Security Council mandates. So this is not a whim by President Saakashvili. He is fully part of a major international mission which has a sound legal basis and to which 49 other countries are contributing. So that's the first point. Second, they're there for a very clear reason. Afghanistan has been a hothouse for international terrorism. Aside from it being a country where the Taliban ruled and they were arguably the worst human rights abusers in the world, but from our own strategic interests, what we have to prevent is that Afghanistan is a breeding ground for terrorism, and B, destabilizes the wider region, including Central Asia, which, as we discussed, is of strategic importance to us. The terrorism, the extremism, the drugs that can flow from Afghanistan will inevitably end up in Georgia, as they end up in my country, as they end up all across Europe, as they end up in Russia. If we don't manage together to help the Afghans be able to provide for their own security, we will all pay the price. We have seen it. This is not political fiction. It's clearly demonstrable recent history. So for all those reasons, Georgia's contribution is part of a bigger team. It's important. And I should conclude by saying it's very valued. Georgia has shown and is showing with this contribution, which is substantial in number and comes without caveats, without restrictions on, that it is a contributor to international security. To be very open, I think it's very important for Georgia to show that it's not just a problem, it's a solution. It helps provide solutions. And that's exactly what Georgia is doing through this contribution. So I think the political message is very strong. And I can assure Georgians that it is heard in NATO capitals.
Thank you. And how would you evaluate the achievement of ISAF by now? And can you tell me a few words about the exit strategy, post-2014 strategy?
ISAF, in our view, has done a lot. And from a military point of view, there has been an enormous amount of progress. And the bottom line is more and more the Afghan National Security Forces can provide for the security in their own country. And in many ways they can do it better, because when they walk into a village, they know who is who and we don't. So we are confident that the training of Afghan police and army will continue despite the complications that we're having now. And we'll be able to hand over to lead security responsibility to them throughout the country by 2014. There are two challenges. One is to complete that process, and as you quite rightly said, what comes after. What comes after will be a small NATO military training mission, basically. But we also need, and I say we in the largest sense, need to find a way to ensure that the international community keeps funding the Afghan government, Afghan National Security Forces. They can't afford to keep paying for their own army once we leave. So we have to pay for it for a while, because if we don't, they won't be able to maintain their security forces. Keeping one Afghan soldier in place is, I think, something like 1/10 or 1/20th the cost of keeping one of our soldiers there. So it's a good deal for us. But we need, as an international community, to continue to provide funding, and we're working on that.
Sorry for
I didn't mean to shock you with the trust fund discussion.
Everybody agrees that Libya campaign showed strengths and weaknesses of NATO. On one hand, NATO managed to achieve its goal. Colonel Gaddafi is not a threat to Libyan people anymore. But on the other hand, it showed some divisions within the alliance, like a couple of major... Well, eventually there was a unanimous decision on the operation, but not all of them, all the major members took part in the military operation, and some just abstained partially. So what does it say about the unity within the alliance?
You're right that it was a little bit complicated. In fact, one of the new features of NATO is that if a country contributes to the military operation, they sit at the table for all parts of running the operation, determining the policy, etc. So we had many non-NATO countries, including some Arab countries, sitting at the table with us during the discussions on Libya. And I know, because I've spoken to their diplomats, they were a little surprised to see how much we argue amongst ourselves. But the bottom line is, it was a success. The alliance stayed together. It's never going to be the case, in my view, that, especially today and into the future, all allies contribute militarily to all operations. At the same time as we were fighting in Libya, the Germans, who didn't contribute forces in Libya, were deploying battalions into Kosovo, because that was also getting out of control. We have all, of course, 28 of the allies in Afghanistan. So everybody's doing their part in different ways, and I think people don't always see the big picture, of course, because the media is focusing on one area. That's the first point. Everybody's contributing in their own way, and we stayed together and we succeeded. But the second point is, what it showed to us was that we have capabilities that are in too small number. Smart bombs, precision munitions. I mean, we caused almost no civilian casualties, despite 25,000 flights by our jets. That's a testament to the commander, but it shows how important these munitions are, and we need to have more of them. Air-to-air refueling, intelligence, and surveillance. There's key capabilities that we need to have. And it also showed the heavy dependence on the United States. And while European countries took the lead in the airstrikes, without the U.S., this would have been totally impossible. And so we've been working ever since Libya to learn the lessons and apply them, in particular to ensure that all of us don't end up sitting on the American shoulders too much. They have a lot on their shoulders, and they're cutting back. So this question of transatlantic balance is one of the most powerful lessons for us.
That's how this smart defense concept came out?
Exactly.
Can you just elaborate briefly on that,
Sure.
on this smart defense concept?
Well, and there's even more than smart defense happening now. In essence, there are three main tracks when it comes to capabilities, and you're quite right that Libya has sparked all of this. One is smart defense, as you say. And smart defense is basically about making sure that we have the capabilities we need. What does that mean? It means prioritizing on the top 10. It means pooling and sharing, in essence, buying things together that we couldn't afford alone. And it means some countries specializing. You do this, I do that. That's smart defense. The second track is enhanced connectivity, to use that word again. It's making sure that all these pieces can work together. And that doesn't just mean NATO, it also means NATO and partners. So that we can plug and play, as we did in Libya. And third is to have a long-term vision. We're looking at 2020 as the period towards which we should aim, so that we can have all of this in place. So those are sort of the three tracks of capability development.
Thank you. Few words about Iran. I know that so far Secretary General Rasmussen has been repeating that there is no intention whatsoever to get involved in settling Iran issue. But what if Iran blocks Strait of Hormuz?
Well, one of the things I was taught by the first Secretary General, for which I was spokesman, Jaap de Hoogscheffer, was that was almost his second instruction to me, I remember. Never answer questions that begin with the word if. And I tried to follow that. That being said, the Gulf is a region of strategic importance to all of us, allies, and Georgia as well. There's no doubt. 60% of the world's energy supplies pass through that area. And I think something like 35% of the world's energy is produced in that area. So we have every interest in ensuring the free flow of supplies. NATO is not engaged in this. We have a number of allies who have quite substantial bilateral relations and military presences there as well. But the alliance, for now anyway, is not involved in preserving that. The partners that we have in the Gulf have made it very clear, and including in public, that they are very concerned about Iran. We're all concerned about Iran. The Secretary General has said that the position of the alliance certainly is that Iran needs to meet its international obligations. including when it comes to the nuclear program, on which NATO is not involved. But beyond that, for the moment, there is no NATO role.
Thank you. And the same goes for Syria. So far, everything that has been said on behalf of NATO is about not getting involved in Syria. But again, the massacre continues there. People are dying, and innocent people are dying, like children. What, in your view, is the solution if there is no NATO involvement? Like how it can be resolved? I'm just trying to avoid this question.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very well phrased. I mean, nobody can take this lightly. This is a tragic situation from a human point of view, from a political point of view. If there was a good answer, I think we would have found it as an international community. I don't mean NATO. If it was clear what to do, we would have done it. The view of the Allies is certainly that while NATO shouldn't be involved, the resolutions that have been put before the UN Security Council should have been adopted. And the fact that they were not adopted was more than deeply unfortunate. I think Allies have used much stronger language than that. And the result of the failure in the UN Security Council has been a stepping up by the Assad regime of its extreme brutality in Syria. So this is a very, very bad situation. For the moment, anyway, the international community does not see military solutions to this. So they are applying sanctions and political pressure. The Arab countries are, of course, taking the lead. Turkey is deeply concerned and affected. But the longer this goes on, the greater the risk of regional destabilization. I have seen that thousands, if not tens of thousands of people have now moved to Lebanon. Lebanon is, of course, highly fragile when it comes to Syria. So, I wish I had a good answer, but I don't.
Can you somehow describe the difference between Libya and Syria situations?
Sure. First, when it came to Libya, there was strong regional support led by the Arab League for a military intervention. That is not the case in Syria. Second, there were clear UN Security Council resolutions for military intervention around Libya. No-fly zone, protection of civilians, etc. That is not the case with Syria. And third, from a military sort of technical point of view, a military operation there would be extremely complicated and difficult to conceive of, frankly, in terms of being successful. So the conditions are very different. Finally, the implications of a wider civil war fueled by weapons brought in by whomever into Syria, when it comes to Turkey, when it comes to Lebanon, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Israel, are dramatic. And so I think countries are not clear on what would happen and whether what would happen would be even worse if they were to intervene. So for all those reasons, I think we can understand why nothing yet has been done in a substantial way. But I can assure you that NATO governments in other fora, not here, are looking as hard as they can at solutions.
Thank you. And like a few words about Chicago summit. Is it going to, you just mentioned like several issues it's going to touch upon in NATO is going to touch upon in Chicago. Is it going to be like about enlargement at all? Is Georgia going to get like anything, any further signal? What are your...
I mean, what the Chicago summit will clearly do is discuss the future of Afghanistan, and Georgia will be invited in that context for sure. Missile defense, which we discussed, smart defense, which we discussed, and capabilities, and partnerships, recognizing our most important partners, or at least our core or representative partners. Representative partners, I think, is the term that's being used. And Georgia would be, of course, included in that list as well. How enlargement will be recognized, it's not going to be an enlargement summit. there will be no invitations, as far as I can understand now, to any country to begin accession or to join the alliance. So it won't really be an accession summit. But how we recognize aspirant countries, if and how, in what way, in a meeting or in a declaration or however it happens, if it happens, that's very much an open topic. They're all discussing the various formats and what there's time for. So I don't think we yet have the answer, but I think we will have the answer by the time NATO foreign ministers and defense ministers, by the way, meet here in the middle of April. So then it'll all be clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, thank you for finding time to talk to us. It was a great pleasure, and hope to talk to you again maybe after Chicago Summit.
Anytime, it's a great pleasure.
Thank you.